used to contain that expansion or to put it in place. We have identified that inside the municipal boundary there is plenty of land to be developed that is urban but has not been yet developed. Colombian regulations ask municipalities to allocate land for expansion as well, but this is not enough. We're inviting cities to do 30-year projections, and this is all the expansion area that has been developed or that will be developed throughout the future. Next, this is another map, stuff that we have done related to another city in Colombia called Monteria, that is very important, and that is identifying, once you have located the land, you need to identify natural constraints and particularly pay attention to assets of high environmental value. A lot of times these areas, if not managed properly, end up being subject of informal urbanization. What we're trying to do is identify them and include them in the plan and identify a lot of these areas as possible public spaces in the future. Next. Back to Valledupar, one thing that you can do now that you have located the area in a map is identify kind of some existing capacities that are in the city. So in red, you can see areas or very small roads that are used to connect the main core to some towns and rural villages, and these are roads that are already existing. Of course, the width of these roads is very narrow, but it provides something that is already in use and something that in principle doesn't even need to be compensated. So those are kind of some first determinants that we used in order to identify and locate the arterial grid of roads. Another very important thing that you need to factor is division of property titles. So in Colombia there is a cadastre that you can look. This is actually the division of plots underneath the expansion area. We identified roughly 300 landowners on the fringe of Valledupar, and we wanted to make an optimization when doing this arterial grid that would make this feasible and help us to implement this plan. So the principles that we followed are that roads should be between plots, so you increase the coverage of the area, more people can access and benefit from the roads, and also by doing it between plots, you split the load of plot owners to 50% on each side. So following this scheme of the cadastre, we then did the arterial grid of roads, which is what you're going to be seeing next, following some general principles. So ideally you should have straight lines, but as you saw, the distribution of the cadastre is very irregular, and you need to be careful not to create inefficiencies, breaking plots in half, leaving 5 or 10% of a plot kind of interrupted, that is going to lose any use or any value, and is going to make the landowner kind of reject this intervention a little bit. So you can see here how a straight line would create this kind of inefficiencies, and making it a little bit irregular, not too much, you can actually address for that. And also a thing that we try to avoid is identify highly subdivided places, because that's also going to increase the number of people that you're going to have to negotiate. Next, so this is the definitive layout that you see, some 100-kilometer grid all throughout the periphery of the city, that eventually, you know, as the city progresses and gets built up, will be consolidated, and that's going to serve as a backbone for the development of the city, and it's going to improve the connectivity. So talking about implementation, we already have done some works and have been able to negotiate with landowners. Here, what I'm telling you, this is the first road that we actually did, and I'm going to talk really quickly about that in a minute. And the red lines are the roads that are going to be doing intervening in roughly 2 months. We have identified roughly 35 kilometers. We have spoken to landowners that are willing to cooperate and actually willing to transfer the property of the titles to the city without being compensated, and I'm going to elaborate a little bit on this additional. So this was one of the meetings that we had when we called the landowners and we presented the plan, and this was one of the big fears that we had to begin with, was engaging with landowners. We thought that they were going to ask for crazy amounts of money for compensation. This was really scary. We actually did an assessment of how much it would cost to the municipality to buy the land. much to our surprise, we identified that it's pretty cheap actually. Our director, Professor Angel, likes to say that buying the roads for the fringe of the city to do this arterial grid would cost roughly $2.5 million, which is the cost of a single bedroom apartment in Manhattan. And even though that seems to be cheap on paper, we know that cities in intermediate cities in developing countries don't have that kind of money. And when we spoke to the developers, what we learned is that they're happy to have these kind of roads because the values of their properties is going to increase. So a lot of the negotiations that we have done are on a voluntary basis, and the city has not had to compensate the landowners anything. And kind of trying to do some inspiration, we wanted to have a scheme of demarcation for these arterial grid corridors that was something that people could relate to. Inviting mayors and politicians to talk and to plan about expansion is something that is very hard to connect with. It's not something that you grasp. You're not technically doing a paved road, you're not doing a new hospital, you're not cutting ribbons. And what we wanted to do is to provide an alternative for politicians of showing something nice and do activities engaging with the community. These are just two examples of trees planted along corridors. One is Buenos Aires and this is cherry blossoms in DC. That is actually very beautiful with a very minimal intervention. So because of that, next, we have decided to do the demarcation of these areas. This is the fringe of Valledupar, and this is the first plot that we did. Doing the survey and then planting trees along the sides of the roads every 10 meters. Next. So this is how we do. Now mayors are extremely motivated. Landowners are also extremely motivated. They have kids to plant trees. They take their pictures, and it's something that they can actually show as work that they have done. In these places that don't have re-election or that have re-election, is very important for them to show something. So this makes the projection very real. So we're projecting then, next, to have, this is the first row, eventually this is how it would look. Again, it's a very minimal intervention and it's pretty simple to do. And even though buying the trees to do this demarcation can be costly, so of high environmental value, this is actually urban land in Valledupar, and we're working both with the city, interested in having developments like this. Of course, any kind of development close to this area is going to have a very beautiful view, and then the development is going to be more valuable. So the way we scaled this to national level, we started working with 5 cities. We've done amazing progress in 2. We got the attention of the national government, next, and the national government, the National Planning Department, has asked us to provide technical assistance to have a model that is replicatable and is very similar along the lines of what the toolkit wants to do. So we created a simplified methodology following this example. We did a study of urban extent, something similar to what you're seeing here, for 100 cities in Colombia to provide hard evidence and to allow the calculations to be more efficient. You can find this exercise in the Atlas of Urban Expansion Colombia.org, and they have created a program called Modernos to put this in place. And to allow, this is how the Atlas looks, to allow that any public official in any city in Colombia can access this kind of content. We have created an online platform that contains videos that are roughly 10 to 15 minutes long that walk the practitioner